right. This is going to be our first lecture on Walt Whitman. Sorry. And this will just be kind of an intro to Whitman, and we will do the body of electric in the next lecture. Walt Whitman, boy, what to I love Walt Whitman in a way. I love her, more than most living people. He was just this huge, gregarious, just said yes to life, in a way that was distinctly American somehow. And he is the grand poobah, the sort of father of all American poetry. The two biggest, two biggest poets, I think, in the American tradition are certainly, I would say Whitman and then Dickinson. Whitman was an interesting guy. He was extraordinarily sort of charismatic in life. He was a large guy. I think he was about 6 feet tall at a time when the average man was about 5 foot, I think, 7 or 8. So men were noticeably shorter then. So it'd be maybe the equivalent of being 6'3" or 4 today. So he was sort of a fairly physically large man. He was a very physical man, and very eccentric. Hung out in the sort of this place Thafts in New York City, where he spent much of his time. Which was the Bohemian Bar, where all the artists hung around, and all the theater people, and also a lot of homosexual people. And he was either gay or, and I think this is probably more likely, bisexual, but he had a lot of, but maybe 70-30 gay, if that makes sense. I'm not sure it does, but he seemed to have more gay affairs than straight. He sort of is the poet of democracy, and he really, he writes his great work where he's sort of adding his collection of poems sort of most of his life. He does write short stories, and he was a newspaperman for years. He didn't hold down many jobs because he was always kind of they were hard to. He would get lost going here and going there and get distracted, and he didn't always meet his deadlines. However, he actually produced quite a bit of work, so he wasn't. He always got accused of being lazy. That was probably an unfair charge, but. He was just really, he came from a tough family, a lot of mental illness in his family. He had to share a bed with several siblings. I think there was 12 of them, maybe. They were all, by the way, very proud Americans even then. And again, let's not forget, America, as he's going into write Leaves of Grass, is about 75, 80 years old. We're not, no one's certain it's going to make it. In fact, there's a civil war coming up, and he actually... And again, had these huge, almost grandiose ambitions that were almost childlike. He and his belief, but also a kind of purity of heart and belief in these things. That he really seemed to believe the Leaves of Grass might stop the Civil War. And he became a little bit involved in that war, which I'll circle back to in a few minutes. But I think to start to understand Whitman. Is to see him as the poet of this new burgeoning democracy that's rising up, and almost consider themselves like the Greeks have Homer, or even the Yahwist God, or the canonists of the Old Testament. He is kind of trying to write a sacred yet secular text for this new and rising democracy. And that is the basic filter to sort of view everything through. His style shows shows all this. First of all, we'll deal with the title of his great work, right? Leaves of Grass. Leaves, in that sense, can be read as like shoots or blades of grass, but also leaves were a printer slang. For cheap paper to sort of test out your type print on. It was the cheap stock, right? Which again, for a democratic poet, right? He's not trying to be exalted. He's trying to exalt the working man, the ordinary, which is who he always aligns himself with. And again, if in a democracy, if every is the the sacredness of the individuals was going to be important, and every individual, not just the great man, right? So, Leaves of Grass are right away, a bit of a self-deprecating joke, and also, don't think of me more as a craftsman, not as some exalted, artist who's gazing at his navel and waiting for the muses to touch him with genius, right? No, he was much more of a working man, and I thought of himself that way than that. Again, the writing is often a lot of plain language, although also to be fair, he had amazing facility and gift. And lyricism at times in his poems, a real musicality to it. But he also would use any word at his disposal, and that was sort of the democratizing. It wasn't just this. I mean, if you read Moby Dick, even right, it's still a certain amount of almost not old English certainly, but almost a Shakespearean sort of Middle English sort of there, right, and a heightened language. And Whitman would do that, but he would also he'd do the high. He'd hit every register, high to the low. A bit of a magpie in the sense that he would gather from wherever. A lot of working man's slang. He loved riding up and down Broadway, which was still cobblestones. Which, by the way, you go to New York now, and especially some of those. Like entrances to Central Park and then places like that where the asphalt is sort of crumbled away or come up. You can still see those cobblestones beneath the streets there. And again, New York was a very raucous, different place. Lots of maybe not thousands, but certainly hundreds probably of immigrants, and maybe a day, flooding into New York from those ports. It really did seem like it kind of was the center of the world. And there were, I don't know how many thousands of horse-drawn carriages. And the taxi drivers were the men who drove these carriages. Again, they were big, burly men with the powerful chest and the shoulders, right, to control those 1,500-pound animals that were a couple of them sometimes that were pulling these things around. Boy, those wagon with those steel wheels going against those cobblestones, and thousands of them literally at a time. Made an unbelievable rackets. It was a noisy city, and in the summer months, boy, I tell you, there was no sanitation department yet. So you have all these horses out there, and they're basically shitting and pissing everywhere. I mean, 6 stories high, some of the piles, when they did do it, but mostly they just left it right there in the streets. But again, the stench of New York in July and August could be kind of overpowering. But it was where everything was happening, and it was just every kind of person imaginable. Who knows? Again, New York is still very much like that, right? With all the dialects and everything, but. It was a much rawer sort of a form of itself then, and he was fascinated and loved riding. You got to know a lot of those cab drivers riding up and down. But anyway, he picked up a lot of his words. He collected whatever sounded good to him there. Used a lot of Native American Indian words, right? He would use as well. He also liked to use lists. And the working man and the carpenter and the tradesman and the builder and the mason and the baker and anyway the butcher, and he would sort of give he loved giving you sort of a list, which again itself is a sort of democratizing, and no poet had really done that, at least to my knowledge, before him. Although in a way, Homer, some places of Homer where I believe certain families had given probably financial tributes to get their son, fallen sons, his son had fallen in a war or something, their name into the great song. You get a little of that. The list. Also, the open line is what he's famous for, which is, it's not metered, right, the way Emily Dickinson's mostly is, or Blake, which we read earlier, is, and not measured out. It just sort of ends when he thinks it ought to end, and it's his natural. He wanted, there is a quote from him, I don't remember exactly, but something along the lines of that. It should be as natural as as the woods, and the asymmetrical way woods grow, and it isn't just measured out and meted the way a chartered the streets would be, right? And so he that's what he wanted his to look at. And again, you get the title Leaves of Grass, and then you get this sort of much more naturalistic sort of line that sort of just sort of ends when it just sort of feels right to him. And again, the poet of, if you're going to be the poet of democracy, what he's trying to create with the Leaves of Grass is sort of the sacred text, a secular sacred text of democracy, America's version of a Bible or the Homeric epics. And this was going to be, the great text for Americans, hopefully, to refer to. And in his big invention here is the the sort of deity, the Yahwist or the Odysseus or Achilles, or in the Greek tradition, or the Christ figure of the New Testament. The figure of that in this book is going to be, the I. And he's always writing from first person. I this and I that. And yeah, a little bit the I is Walt Whitman. But mostly it's this sort of universal I. Because again, this is going to be a nation of I's, right? It's going to be a democracy where that makes the individual something sacred and something, the primacy of the individual. And if that's going to be true, so everything is a collective. But again, if this is going to hold together, and the democracy should be sort of from the bottom up. That's not quite the way, by the way, that I'm working, and still isn't. But we have more of a republic, right? But he thought there were certain things that needed to be, and for one thing, the human body needed to be something sacred to him. I'll get back to that in a bit, and but also the sort of the reverential, or the sort of the what's the word I'm struggling for with here? There's the devotional energy, sort of the prayer, the version of prayer, and this is going to have to be fellowship, right? And boy, friendship and fellowship meant so much to him in real life. And he was there were soldiers who kept in touch with Walt Whitman. He became his brother. Got wounded in the Civil War later, and he voluntarily, went to one of the main sort of hospitals there, and something like one out of every three operations was an amputation in the Civil War. So the bone saw got a lot of work, and it was gruesome. And again, somebody was going to make the body sacred, so all these, you would see piles, literally 10 feet tall, of limbs, arms, legs, and things like that. And again, rotting away and going, the men in the hospital, they're going gangrene again. They didn't have the anesthetics we have today, nor were they even able to keep it as clean and then everything as we do in a modern hospital. So there were soldiers for whom Walt Whitman was gave them a last kiss and sent them out of the world, and he did this for a lot. The soldiers loved Whitman. He'd come in, go out every day, try to find them bits of candy and tobacco and cigarettes and things like that, and come in with a sack, cloth sack, and sort of they almost had to get. He had this big bushy beard. Go look up some Google image him sometime. And he was beloved, among those soldiers. And he offered that, he did what he could, really. He was a generous, big-hearted person his entire life, and he thought that was something necessary if democracy was going to make it, and that fellowship was going to have to be the sort of immaterial glue to hold this sort of the American experiment together. And finally, I guess we will get to it. And again, the body being something sacred to Whitman. And we'll see this, especially when we cover the poem that we're going to cover next. But essentially the human body, and by the way, all of the human body, that includes, some of these, some of the great lines of his in regards to the human body be, I know no sweeter fat than that which sticks to my own bones, right? Which again, it can also seem like a very self-absorbed comment, but again, I don't, that I is always a collective I with women. What was one of the other ones? It was sticks to my own bones. Why I'm struggling with this, I just had it in my head. They talk about it. The scent of my armpits is sweeter than the finest prayer, or the odor of my armpits sweeter, finer than than prayer. I mean, it was just, which really sent people reeling. In the 19th century that he was talking like this. But and again, so the body is something sacred, and it wasn't just, and every part of the body had to be equally good. Just like every person in a democracy was going to. The natural sort of extension of that for Whitman was every part of the human body. So it wasn't just the head or the beauty or a woman's the beauty of a woman's eyes or no male genitalia features rather prominently in a way it wouldn't before Whitman in some of his poetry. And again, for him, I think once the human body is sacred, okay, now we can have democracy. Right? That is like that sort of the initial molecule that can grow into the great nation that is going to be America as he sees it. All right, that was a quick little intro, and I hope helps on Walt Whitman, and I will do the body electric in the next lecture. All right. Okay.